This defendant has fooled everyone who thought they knew who he was. I ask you to return a verdict of guilty against the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, for the murder of his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. Don't let him fool you too.
It's Emerson, and if you've been watching the new Hulu series, Death in the Family, then you've seen the storm surrounding Alex Murdaugh. The lies, the fall, the chaos. I was in that South Carolina courtroom, and prosecutor Creighton Waters, the man who took Alex Murdaugh down, listen to what he says really happened behind the scenes at the trial of the century. Creighton, I want to first ask you about, there's some renewed interest right now in the Murdaugh case.
It's news to the Murdaughs. Long may we live.
Amen.
Have you watched the Hulu special?
No, I haven't watched any of that. I mean, again, I've been traveling the country, speaking to different groups. I'm still doing some documentaries here, but don't really have too much interest in watching a fictionalized, dramatized account. We lived this thing for real, and that was good enough.
I have to say, I watched it. And I don't know if it was PTSD or therapy that I was kind of going through as I was watching it, but it was a little bit of both. And I cannot even imagine what would go through your head watching this right now.
I don't typically go back and watch those shows. We still have a lot to do. We still have a lot going on with the case, with various companion cases. And believe it or not, there's other bad guys out there we're trying to catch as well.
The amount of time we spent was just a fraction. When I say we, I mean me sitting there listening, even all of the hours and hours that I put into the documentary podcasts that I worked on, fraction of what you did.
Well, it was a lot, and my team spent a whole lot of time on this. I got this case just a few days before the side of the road happened, and of course, I get this case. I already had situational awareness of what was going on, but I'm trying to, wrap my head around how I'm going to lead this effort. And then with just a few days, the law firm announces, of course, that he's been terminated for allegedly stealing from his clients. And I knew right then, and I told my team, I said, we're going to have to focus on that. These things could be related, but even if they aren't, if in fact this powerful lawyer was using his power and his influence and his family name and all of that to abuse the judicial system, that in and of itself was something that we needed to explore and expose. And so we immediately started to work very hard on that. A lot of, at the very early stages, there were a lot of victims that I talked to that were very skeptical that anything would ever be done. And we had to assure them. I told more than one, I promise you we will see this thing through to the end. Ultimately we did so, but it was a whirlwind investigation. And, ultimately all of that sort of led to July of 22, when I presented the case to the chief of SLED and to the attorney general and said, hey, we believe that it's time also indict the murders. And, I wrote a theme right then for that presentation, The Gathering Storm, and how all of these things sort of dovetail together. And that became the theme of the case.
And it really played out too, because I remember sitting next to John Monk, who is the state newspaper reporter, sitting next to him. And as the clouds gathered over that courtroom and the gathering storm actually hit, I couldn't believe the drama of that moment. I remember John looking at me and goes, "This could not be more Shakespearean if you tried."
Well, yeah, I mean, again, that had been my theme for 7 months. And then as I'm giving my opening statement, I can see the clouds darken outside. I can, hear the trees start to rustle.
And you're going to hear some of what was going on in Alex Murdaugh's life leading up to that day. Stuff that happened that very day, stuff that was leading up, a perfect storm that was gathering, much like the storms that are coming outside today. Listen for that evidence. Listen to that gathering storm that all came to a head on June 7th, 2021, the day the evidence will show he killed Maggie and Paul.
So that was it did seem like in the moment when I was giving that opening statement, a little bit of providence or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you weren't alone in that. That's what it felt like. It felt like there was a lot of ghosts right behind you. But I wanted to ask you, one thing that I asked Attorney Dick Harpootlian, who was the defense attorney, of course, for Alec Murdaugh, if there is a killer out there that you keep telling me, that there is another killer out there, not just an empty chair theory, but that there's somebody else out there that you're actually hunting. What do you say to that? That there could be someone else that could have been involved in this?
Well, again, we as prosecutors have a very high and strong obligation to seek justice, and in this particular case, I think you saw it play out on the stand, the extremely exhaustive investigation that was done. And I will just say this: that if we have evidence that somebody committed a crime, then I think it's pretty clear that we're not scared to bring charges. So I'll just leave it at that.
I don't know if we ever got a clear answer of why Stephen Smith homicide investigation was brought up and re-examined right after the double murders.
Well, I think that's something, first of all, that I can't really comment any further on because, things are ongoing. I will say that cold cases can be very difficult. But this was, what happened to Stephen was, I think, just something that had happened in the community. And then when all this drama happened with Alec and Maggie and Paul, it just caused people again to look back at that issue that still, bothered a lot of people, that there hadn't been a resolution. And so I think that's where that caused that to kind of go to the forefront again. But ultimately, other than to say that we're constantly looking closely at anything we can, I can't comment any further on that.
No. Yeah, it's still not resolved, is it? I mean, and like you said, it's a multiple layered, you know, prosecution, investigation, trial. Everything about this was multi-layered. There was no simple. That was the whole point. Was that this was just a hornet's nest full of issues all the way through.
Well, it really was. I mean, truth is stranger than fiction. I think that when I look back on all of this, if I had taken this and decided to fly to LA and pitch this as a movie or a series or something like that, probably the producers have been like, you need to dial it back a little bit. We're losing our suspension of disbelief at this point, because it is a very multi-layered thing. It is an extremely unique story, and I think that's kind of why it also wrapped in some of the other stories as well, as part of this larger narrative that just really has gripped, obviously, the state and the nation as well, and the world. I still get emails from all over the world to this day.
I still get comments too. And what is the comment that you still look at and think, yeah, that I lived through that. Like, what is it that they say to you that just really still resonates with you?
Well, the one thing I've really enjoyed, and I'll be leaving later this week to go do this, is going to prosecutors' conferences and bar conventions and things like that, and giving legal training, and having judges and lawyers, young lawyers, law enforcement, come up to me and say that this whole process kind of really re-enthused their belief in the system, and the idea, particularly as it related to the financial crimes and his, abuse of power to which he's pled guilty, that, there will be accountability. There can be accountability for, powerful members of the profession. And so I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot. And I think that's a big reason why this case, in the larger sense, really gripped the nation. And I think it gave, I've heard over and over again that the efforts that were done there have given people hope, and hope about the system, and have enthused them to go out and fight hard battles as well.
Did you ever think that one of your biggest, uh, really witnesses in this whole case would have turned out to be a dog?
Well, in the words of my co-counsel John Mudders, thank God for Bubba. But no, that was the last thing I thought. But when I first heard the Kennel video, obviously I knew that was going to be hugely significant. So I'll just echo John Mudders again and say thank God for Bubba.
Right, God bless Bubba. Yeah, I remember when we heard it, of course, was in that courtroom.
Right.
And I think you couldn't hear a pin drop. It was literally unbelievable when you announced that that existed. And nobody really knew how to wrap their head around that because it was so damning.
Well, I mean, again, yeah, it was obviously very significant evidence. We still have the appeal going on, so I'm going to be, a little bit reserved in our comments. But it was, I can talk about what our strategy was and publicly, what we presented. We knew that was going to be significant, but we also didn't know exactly what position the other side would take on that. One of the things that I had to do and wanted to do was for the jury to get very familiar with Alex's voice prior to hearing that video for the first time. And so to do that, we had to play, the body cam video from the scene.
When was the last time you were here with them or talked to them or anything like that?
It was earlier tonight. I don't know the exact time, but
Okay.
I left. I was probably gone an hour and a half from my mom's, and I saw them about 45 minutes before that.
There's a risk to that in as much as you're playing his exculpatory version of events for the jury, and that's what they're hearing. But I also tried to get that jury to, as they listen to all of that, to be thinking of it with a critical eye, so that when they first heard that Kennel video, it was like you said, you could hear a pin drop because everybody was hearing that voice on there and, making their own determination as to who that was.
Quit, Cash. Come on. Quit. That's okay. Come here. It's not that bad. Come here, Cash. Shit. Come here. Post it. Cash.
Well, and then you hear he basically, you let him just walk into it when he decides that he's just going to have to take the stand, right? Just can't resist. Can't
Well,
resist it.
again, that's his decision, but I will say that we were, I was always confident that was what he was going to do, and we were ready to go.
Well, and I mean, it felt like and it's interesting. The reason I bring this up was because I just read Dick Harpootlian's book, Dig Me a Grave.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about in that book how he really, and maybe I got this wrong, but I don't think so, that basically he really does, any defense attorney, criminal defense attorney will say, don't take the stand. And then for your own, your defendant to make that decision had to, and to let you just play it out, he basically did it to himself.
Well, again, I'll just say this. It's ultimately his decision to do that. I was always confident and preparing for the fact that he would. And, you can talk to Dick and Alec about that decision. Again, that's an absolute right of the defendant to testify or not to testify. But as a prosecutor, you're always assessing that. You've always got to be ready for it. And, like I said, I was just always pretty assured that he was gonna take that stand.
And he had to say he lied.
I did not tell them that I went to the kennel. I lied about that.
And at the same time, you also looked at this jury and tried to tell them that you had been cooperative in this investigation.
Other than lying to them about going to the kennel, I was cooperative in every aspect of this investigation.
Very cooperative, except for maybe the most important fact of all, that you were at the murder scene with the victims just minutes before they died. Right?
I did not tell them that I went to the kennel.
Well, again, he was going to have to get on the stand if he's elected to take it and, explain some things, including that video.
Yeah. There was really nothing else he could say except for that he lied. And I think that's what, it was pretty brilliant, honestly, to watch this whole prosecution come down. Charlie Condon, who well, the former Attorney General, South Carolina's Attorney General that I worked with so closely. He hired you, right?
That's right.
He told me that. And I think he told me A.G. Wilson, was he his intern? Was he Charlie's intern?
He was an intern it was either Attorney General Condon, or it might have been Attorney General McMaster, but yeah, A.G. Wilson was an intern back in the
Yeah.
day. And I was a young attorney. I remember interviewing with the final interview with um, uh, General Condon, and I think I told him, yeah, I voted for the Democrat in the election. So anyway, he hired me anyway. So
Who did he run against?
Dick Harpootlian.
That's what I I thought you were going to tell me that. That's
Mm.
crazy. Boy, life is long. I mean, it
It
may
is
feel
long.
like it goes by quickly, but life is long. You're not going to believe who's going to run back into your world.
Hmm. Well, yeah, it's a small state and a small bar, but again,
Well, he said it was the best hire he ever made. I'll just tell you that right now. I think you were in the top of what Charlie Condon saw. Is he spent more time telling me how brilliant y'all played this. I think it was an extraordinary thing for him to get to watch, from his seat too.
it
But I wanted
was.
to ask you, like, has anybody in your office watched has anybody in your office watched the Murdaugh Hulu special?
Yeah, most of the team is still together. We've had a few move on, but yeah, some of the other folks have watched it and they've
What are
tried to
the
talk to me.
texts? Can you tell
Well, they
me?
try to talk to me about it a little bit, but again, I don't need to hear about Hulu's dramatization of these events. We all lived them, and
It is such a
so.
good point, and I think, I it would never be able to capture what it was like in the moment for us at times. I mean, to see where you went all the way through a year and a half of this, of actual investigation on your part to try and figure out what transpired. Can you tell me what that moment was? Maybe you talked about it in the trial, but can you tell me what that moment was that you realized that you were going to be able to move forward?
Well, obviously we were doing that financial investigation, and that started particularly as we moved into the spring of 22. That started to really paint a picture and of Alec, and it started to dovetail with the murder case. And then in, I think it was April of 2022, we got the Kennel video, and between that and having to really put together the long history of these financials to which he's pled guilty, that was really kind of the aha moment when those two converged.
Is there anything you would have done differently, do you think, when you looking back on it?
Well, there's always stuff I would have done differently. I mean, whenever you're lead counsel, you hope you make more right decisions than wrong ones. And I'm sure I made some decisions along the way that probably weren't the best. But again, it's just like I use a lot of sports analogies. It's like being a football coach. We got obviously football going on, or playoff baseball. As a manager, you make calls, and not everyone's going to be right. I told my team before this case started that I was going to throw an interception. We were going to have a bad play. But what do you do in that situation? You shrug it off and keep going. I remember at one point, one of the defense witnesses that I waived David Fernandez off on challenging his qualifications. And then in hindsight, I was like, gosh, should have, or as the testimony was going, I was like, gosh, shouldn't have done that. But then David did such an amazing job in cross-examining him. I think that, it ended up doing us far more good than harm. I think the best decision that I made, though, was giving ownership of each part of this case to one of these team members. And you saw them all, whether it was Metters or Savannah or
Mhm.
Johnny James or David or Conrad, and each one of them, or even the AG at the end, each one
Yeah.
of them had their share of the case and ownership of that part of the case. And it really was a great effort. And that's not, of course, to leave out our partners at SLED, who were huge with all of that. And so it really was a unique situation with a great team. And I was just fortunate enough to be the one leading them.
The I would say the only uh, you could never have seen this coming, but the whole Becky Hill thing. I mean, Justice Toll said it best, I think, when she said, and she was the one that was, overseeing this last time it was in court when they were questioning whether or not The clerk of court, of course, Colleton County had gotten involved in some kind of jury tampering, the allegations that were brought up against her, that sort of thing. And Justice Toll said that she just got caught up in the siren of celebrity. Probably say that about a lot of people on this case.
Ms. Hill was attracted by the siren call of celebrity. She wanted to write a book about the trial and expressed that as early as November 2022, long before the trial began.
Well, that's one thing we tried to avoid, and when we went down there, I told everyone that we were going to have to put that out of our minds. And you remember how it was. The whole, courtyard was just covered with media outlets, hundreds of people lined up every day to get inside, wall-to-wall TV coverage. But a buddy of mine, when I was driving down to the trial, he said, he sent me a text. He said, whatever you do, don't read the comments. And so that was really great advice. And so, everybody really was kind of under strict orders not to, watch that or get sucked up into that media coverage, and let's just focus on the job that we know how to do. And, it was always there. I mean, you can tell yourself that, but it's always, we all knew that we were part of something huge. We all knew the attention that was on it. We all knew the pressure that came from that. But I think we did a good job of kind of putting that out of our minds. When we would have breaks, we had a little command center, and we would go in there, and there might be, one of the programs on, and generally I would say mute that or turn that off. I don't need to be hearing that right now. But again, it was just a unique experience, and you were there, and you got to see that as well. And I just remember when it was all said and done, looking around and thinking, this was just a very interesting group of people. I mean, we all had a job to do, whether it was the prosecution or law enforcement or Dick and Jim and Maggie and or all the rest of it. We all had a job to do, and of course the media. But it was still a very interesting group of people that were all kind of thrust together for 6 weeks. And
Well,
so
and
even though
it wasn't even like we were in a big town or something, right? Like we were in
no,
this teeny tiny little
mhm,
hamlet of South Carolina, this corner of the world. So
right,
we were each other's world for that whole
yeah.
6 weeks.
Well, we were, and again, there were there were a lot. While it was very, very stressful and probably took years off all our lives, it was also a very unique experience, and again, couldn't be prouder of the team and the law enforcement that I worked with this. I can't say enough about them that we kind of saw this thing through.
Yeah, it's incredible. What a team. I mean, they really
It was
were.
a great team.
It was like at a Acme casting, I'll be honest. Like you had every kind of personality that you'd want to see on a prosecution team. You brought them together, and they worked like magic, obviously, because it worked.
They did, and I think a big part of that is these are all folks in this team that I built in state grand jury. So it is a lot of different personalities, but we're all very used to working with each other on complex cases. And so it all of a sudden the biggest case in the nation at the time landed in our lap, and I think my folks really rose to the challenge and made me super proud.
Can you tell me what's next for Becky Hill? Do we have any idea of how this is going to go? Are you allowed to talk about what's going on with
Well,
this clerk,
again, that's part of the
former
appeal,
clerk?
so I can't really get, into any too much detail other than to say, that obviously we had that hearing that was very public. We put the jurors on the stand. Justice Toll wrote her order, and rejected the claims that somehow, even if there were some untoward comments that were made, that somehow that could have possibly had any sort of effect on the 6-week trial, with all the evidence that was presented, with all the information that jury had. And that's how the process is supposed to work. But ultimately, that's part of the appeal too. So it's going to go up, it's part of the issues on before the state Supreme Court. We're obviously saying that, just like we said, Judge Newman got it right. We're saying, after a hearing where she sat there and looked everybody in the eye and considered the witnesses, Justice Toll got it right. And it'll be up to the Supreme Court to decide which way they're going to go. Obviously, the defense has their positions. This is just that marathon process I was talking about.
Yeah, so your next stop on this story is going to be an appeal, and whether or not it's going to be heard by the South Carolina Supreme Court.
Yeah. Yeah, it is
And
going to be heard. It's before them right now, and uh, you know, well, whether they have oral argument, I would expect that they would, but we will see. They don't have to, but typically the practice, and particularly a complex case like this, is that they would have oral argument. So I would expect that to come at some point. But again, all of this is up to the Supreme Court, and this is the process that we've all been part of, and this is just what we do as lawyers, and we have our positions that we're very confident in, and we're going to make those to the court, and then let them do what they do.
the cases just never seem to slow down around here.
They do not. They do not. We always have public corruption cases going on. We just recently indicted. I think I'm on my seventh sheriff that I've indicted. Just recently indicted a public official, treasurer in a county. We always have issues going on with narcotics trafficking and gangs and things like that. And, again, the team that I have does a great job of those sort of things. And that's, I think, why we were particularly suited to have done that Murdaugh case a couple of years ago.
Well, the Murdaugh case, we have renewed interest also because we're about to deal with what he's, I guess, Alec Murdaugh's been waiting for after he was convicted by, the jury for double murder of Maggie and Paul. He's looking to turn that around, isn't he?
Well, he is, but I mean that's just part of the process. While that 6-week trial might have seemed like a marathon at the time, and it certainly was. I think the longest criminal trial in state history. That was actually the sprint part, and now we're in the marathon part, and this is just how the process is. Obviously, the defense is going to raise the claims that they raised. We were aggressive and openly so about the types of evidence we wanted to present. We put all that in front of Judge Newman, and ultimately the legal reasons why we thought that was appropriate. And we've raised those positions to the Supreme Court. So this is just part of the process, and we're confident in our positions, and the court will hear the case, and they'll do what they do, and that's just how it works.
I'm gonna ask you 2 questions, and you tell me what you can talk about right now, because we really are down to the wire. Like, end of this month, we're gonna get a record on appeal, aren't we?
That's correct. I mean, we're finishing up the process of filing the briefs. The record actually has been filed, and so they're working on the final briefs right now. And then the case will, sort of go into line with the South Carolina Supreme Court. Now, when or if they decide to have oral argument is completely up to them, and that could be they could expedite things, and we could have an oral argument fairly soon, or we could kind of get into the normal process, and that take a number of months before that happens. And my job from day one is to convict the bad guys and then to defend those convictions on appeal. So we're just doing what the process sets forth in this country that we have.
Well, one thing that a lot of people talk about is the trial within the trial, right? With the financial crimes.
Mr. Griffin introduced the relationship between the defendant and Eddie Smith.
And whether or not that would hold if there was an appeal.
Right.
Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we always knew, again, we were going to be aggressive, but I think as you recall, I filed probably a 20 or 30-page motion prior to the trial, and we just put all our cards on the table, and we said, Judge, defense, this is a unique story, and we can't fairly tell this story unless we are able to completely describe not only this man, but what was going on with his life leading up to the culmination of those 2 murders. And this is a unique situation that needs a unique application of the law. And so we laid that out. The judge considered that and ultimately let it in. We always knew that would be an issue on appeal, but again, that's the nature of the business. We looked at the law, we looked at the rules, we found case law in other states, and then applied the facts of this unique situation to that, and said, we believe this is how the law should rule. And ultimately, Judge Newman saw it that way, but this is what we have appellate courts for. They'll take a fresh look at it and decide, which direction to go.
Well, when Newman did allow that, Judge Newman, and was that a question of who opened that door? I remember there was a whole conversation during the trial about, oh, did somebody open the door to that?
A hearing outside the presence of the jury addressed the issue, made it clear that the roadside shooting was a bridge too far. Then the defense decided to build a road over that bridge, decided to just go right there as if they could dance through fire without getting burned, scarred, or anything. The door was open.
You know, the judge ruled that the defense had opened the door to some extent on that by asking a question to one of Paul's friends. And so it is like most of these legal issues, there's usually multiple layers to them. There's multiple arguments for or against. And so from the state side, and again, I'm just relating the positions we've taken in our public briefs, you know, we not only believe this was the correct application of Rule 404, but also that the defense opened the door as well. And it was also admissible. It was also admissible under the res gestae theory as well, which Judge Newman ruled on. So it's very common for these complex issues to have multiple layers, and for each side to have multiple lines of attack or defense as they look at an issue.
I can't tell you, Creighton, thank you so much for talking to me today. You know, the interest has not waned. I'll be honest. We may have a little bit of Murdaugh fatigue, you and I, but though I do believe that every time I get wrapped back into this story, I think about all the little details that made this whole tapestry come together for you guys. It was a remarkable prosecution, honestly. I'm sure it's going to be, I'm sure you're going to be lecturing on this for a long time.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm actually now teaching at the law school too. So, you know, it's and not just about Murdaugh, of course, but you know, it was a
No,
signature.
we have plenty of scoundrels for you to talk about.
Yeah, I've had quite a few I've gone after over the years. So, you know, maybe by the time I write my book, nobody will care about Murdaugh anymore. But that might be coming at some point.
Creighton, I really appreciate you coming in today to talk to us. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be watching this, a lot of people that are going to be, you know, now that we've had this dramatization on Hulu and all these documentaries and all these books that have come out, there's always going to be that question if there's still something else out there with the whole Murdaugh story. So I'm sure you'll be doing interviews long after this one. But thank you so much for talking to me today, and I hope you're doing well.
Well, I am doing well, Ann, and again, it's great to see you again. You know, you and I did go through this unique experience together, so I always enjoy talking to you, and I'm sure I'll see you down the line.
Yeah, I'll see you at the next crazy court case. A tell-all from Creighton Waters. The secrets he could share. I am so here for it, and you better believe I'll be back in that South Carolina courtroom if Alex Murdaugh shows up for his appeal. Drop a comment below. Do you think there's any shot that Alex could overturn his double murder conviction? Ooh, and stick around because tomorrow we have Creighton's rival, Dick Harpootlian, Murdaugh's defense attorney. If you like getting the inside scoop on stories like this, be sure to subscribe to Criminally Obsessed. We've got a lot more stories coming your way just like this.